Now, as you move along on the ground in Guyana, what was it like?
To be in Guyana?
Yeah. How was it like knowing that you've got the notes and you're on site now?
Well, I think I felt that more keenly my second visit to Guyana, which was last year, because by then I had finished the book and I knew the story, and just about every, we took a trip down the Berbice River, and almost every plantation that I could see on the map had existed, I knew something about. The first time I came, I hadn't done all the research yet. So, for instance, I didn't realize how important the plantation on which Dubulai Ranch now is located, how important that had been in the rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
So the second time that I walked around there, I was much more aware of that than the first time. So the first time for me was really a time to think about the landscapes, the sounds, the smells, the feeling of the heat, just what Guyana was like as a place. The second time, I was much more aware of all the historical events, and that's why I think it's really important for historians to visit the place that they write about. And also, of course, Guyana changed a lot in those 20 years. A big part of the highway that you drive from Georgetown towards Dubulai Ranch is now no longer rutted. It's paved. So things have changed
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
last
yeah,
20 years. And that was also really interesting to see.
yeah. You were able to reproduce the sound, the sight, the color in this book quite vividly, quite vividly, although it was almost 300 years after. And that is saying something not only as a detective of history, but as an artist, as a writer, that you were able to do that. You're able to merge your notes and the writing in such a pleasing way. Really, really impressive.
Thank you. It took a long time.
Now, one of your interests is the history of women. You've studied the history of women,
Yes.
right? So let's turn to the women in this book, Blood on the River. A chronicle of mutiny and freedom. The role of women in the rebellion. Let's talk for a moment, and there are quite a few. There are quite a few. If you can select a few, a couple, one, two, and speak to us about the rebellion through the woman's eye or her activity.
Sure. I have to start by saying that the records of the rebellion really privilege men. About a third of the people who were interrogated afterwards were women. So that's where I got more women's voices. But the women could get away often by saying, I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. And because the European men who did the interrogations believed that women weren't very important in the world, they let the women get away with that. So we have less about the women, also because most of the records that the Dutch put together are about the military struggle. And I think that African descended men were real clear that waging war was men's work. And so the women are a little bit more in the background. There are a number of women who clearly had important roles in the rebellion. They were counselors. They counseled people like Governor Kofi. about matters, political matters, like when he was at the beginning trying to figure out who was with him, who was against him, who did he want to punish for not wanting to join him, and so on. It's clear that a number of women gave him advice on such matters, and it appears that all of those women were related to highly placed rebel leaders. And so I know the names of a number of those women. I think many other women supported the rebellion in different ways. They fed the soldiers. They clothed the soldiers, the rebel soldiers, I mean. They took care of the kids. They kept the families going. And I also think that the great majority of people who were super enthusiastic about the rebellion were young men who were eager to fight, many of whom did not have families yet, many of whom may have been newcomers to Guyana, people straight from Africa who didn't have families and family members, and that women were on the whole more reluctant, more worried about what's going to happen to my kids in a rebellion. How am I going to feed them? How am I going to keep them alive? And that therefore women had a different relationship to rebellion. Women also had fewer opportunities to rise as a result of rebellion. Young men could become military leaders. They could get a following. They could lead their own regiment, so to speak. They could rise in the ranks, both in the military ranks or in the civil ranks, in the civil government that Governor Kofi had put together. For women, apart from those few women I spoke about who were counselors, there weren't formal roles. And so for men, there was an opportunity to rise, and for women, there really wasn't. And of course, that's common in the 18th century. We see that in the American Revolution, we see it in the French Revolution, we see it in the Haitian Revolution. So Berbice is no exception. But it was a time and age in which women were not considered to take on very public roles. And that was true in West Africa, and that was true in the New World.
While you're talking so glowingly about the women's role, a phrase keep passing through my mind. They were sort of influencers, the women, in this whole massive, massive story. They were kind of influencers.
Yes, they were influencers. I'm sure that they discussed with husbands and fathers and sons and nephews about whether to go to war or not, whether to participate, how to participate. Women were also more vulnerable in many ways than men. Men, of course, ran enormous risks if they fought of getting shot.
Yeah.
But the women ran different risks, as we know happens to women in wars. There's the risk of rape, there's the risk of sexual abuse, there is the risk of that all civilians face in terms of not getting enough to eat, diseases that were spreading, and so on. And so I think men and women stood in the rebellion slightly differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you mentioned of all the execution, there were only 4 women, but you already made note as to why they were believed in the testimonies. Well, let's go to the book. Let's go to the book. There's some interesting headings, like rehearsal, the very first chapter. Rehearsal. Rehearsal for what? You know? Don't say anything as yet. There was rehearsal, stalemate, outsourcing of the war. So what? We've got 3 headings here. I think you can put this book in these 3 headings: rehearsal, stalemate, and outsourcing of the war. Let's see if you can capture your book in those headings.
Well, I will try. So the chapter rehearsal talks about a much smaller rebellion that broke out in Berbice a year before the big one in 1763.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a rebellion that just involved basically one plantation. It's eventually suppressed, but it did a number of things that I think were really important. First of all, it made African descended people both think that rebellion was possible, because it took the Dutch more than 6 weeks to suppress it, which in the history of slave revolts is a long time. Many slave revolts were suppressed in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the one in 1823 in Demerara.
Yeah, yeah.
So the fact that it lasted 6 weeks must have given people pause. The Dutch were not nearly as strong as they wanted to make themselves out to be. They were kind of scared. They weren't very good in the jungle. So I think it made a number of particularly men think, maybe there is a possibility here.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the enslaved people lost. And so I think there were plenty of people who thought, rebellion is possible, but boy, when you lose, you're really gonna get punished, right? And then thirdly, it made the white people really scared and nervous because for them, 6 weeks had been a very long time. And so after that rebellion in July of 1762, they're totally on edge. They keep saying to each other, there's going to be another one, there's going to be another one, and we're not prepared. What are we going to do if it happens? And they saw shadows and plots everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that when the big rebellion breaks out, the Dutch hardly fight back. They basically roll over. They're basically thinking, it's really happening now. We got to get out of here. We're going to get slaughtered. And very few of them are willing to fight back. And that helps. That helps. The rebels spread very rapidly, partly through their own efforts, but also partly because the white people were so spooked. So I think that chapter on rehearsal is an important one, that this seemingly small rebellion really had big consequences for the big rebellion that followed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the chapter called Stalemate is crucial because even though Governor Kofi and his fellow leaders were incredibly successful at first, they really managed to drive the Dutch to the coast, to make most of them leave, and to pretty much take over the entire colony, they weren't quite strong enough to drive them out altogether. And at the same time, the Dutch governor who stayed in Berbice with about 100 people, and then he got some reinforcements from the island of St. Eustatius, which was a Dutch island. He got mercenary soldiers from there. He got some help from Suriname. But they weren't strong enough to defeat the rebels. And so for a big part of Governor Kofi's reign, it is kind of a stalemate. Neither the Dutch nor the rebels can really win. What makes the Dutch formidable is that they have ships. And the ships have artillery, they have cannon, and they put those ships in front of the plantation where they're holed up, dageraad. And that means that every time the rebels attack, the Dutch can use those cannon to just really spray the entire plantation and keep the rebels from taking it over. So those ships are really important. And at the same time, they don't have enough soldiers to actually get out of that plantation. They're basically stuck there, the Dutch, because once they venture out into Berbice itself, the rebels will be stronger than they are. So it's a stalemate, and Kofi tries to break out of that stalemate with diplomacy. He's trying to say to the Dutch, let's just quit all this fighting. Let's just divide the colony in two. You take the northern half that's closer to the ocean. We'll take the half that's closer to the rest of South America.
Which is sort of
we will do what we want, and you do what you want in your half.
Which was magnanimous. Yeah.
It's magnanimous. It's also incredibly bold.
What is she working on now? I was just about to say.
I am working on a biography of one of the men who is a leader in the 1763 rebellion.
Oh, my.
And he is one of the men who, towards the end of the rebellion, ends up joining the Dutch. And I can follow his life from 1742, when he arrives in Berbice, 1743 actually, until he dies in Suriname in 1817, when he is 90 years old. So I'm writing a book about him because he's a fascinating figure.
Yep. Good. Looking forward to that. And good luck with that writing.